Hello. Our subject today is the treatment of AIDS using Chinese herbs. I've just been reading a newly published book which is about the isolation of antiviral compounds from plants. It's written by a professor of medicine at the University of British Columbia in Canada, and he has proposed in this book that we should consult with traditional practitioners in order to improve our screening programs to find antiviral compounds from plants. The Institute for Traditional Medicine has been pursuing the subject of treating viral diseases and other infectious problems since 1983. In this program, I'd like to tell you about the basis of our work, our findings, and help you to understand how it might be applied clinically. In order to really appreciate what we've studied, it is important to go over some of the earlier history of Chinese medical thinking, which is later applied to the treatment of AIDS. In China, medical practice using Chinese herbs has gone on for at least 3,000 years. Great progress was made about 1,800 years ago after an epidemic disease caused great destruction of the population and overwhelmed the ability of the medical system at the time. In order to combat that disease, doctors had to reevaluate the medical thinking and apply new approaches. One of these doctors, named Zhang Jungjing, wrote a book about his ideas, which became rather famous. The book is called the Shanghan Lun, and it's been published in 2 volumes, both the Shanghan Lun and a second part called the Jingui Yao Lei, which are now in the English language. The reason that these have been published in English is because the Oriental medical practitioners felt that the information in these books was so valuable and useful today that it should be distributed worldwide. The idea that Zhang presented was that in treating an epidemic disease, one could select a small number of basic formulas which could be applied widely to the population, and these could be adjusted slightly in order to treat the specific symptoms that the individuals are suffering from or to address underlying constitutional factors. That idea was somewhat revolutionary in that previously medical doctors had selected certain therapies which had no direct relation to the type of disease being treated or the person's constitution. Zhang's work stimulated many medical doctors over the years to write evaluations of his books and to update them. Eventually, however, there were other epidemics that had a different nature, and these required different approaches. About 200 years ago, a book on the treatment of feverish diseases appeared, in which a similar approach to Dr. Zhang's was used, but the methods of therapy and the specific herbs used were different. There was another set of epidemics that racked China in the 1870s. These epidemics, again, overwhelmed the medical system. But at this time, there was a different circumstance. Western medical doctors were now present in China, and they saw that to treat this epidemic, one needed to apply the techniques of hygiene and isolation of the populations so that the virus would not be transmitted. That idea was not prevalent amongst Chinese practitioners, but it was successful in the treatment of the disease. In fact, the difference between the success rate of the medical practitioners from the West and those from the Orient was so great that the Chinese government decided that traditional Chinese medicine should be banned. The system of healing, which had persisted for more than 2,000 years, was thus put aside for the most part, and Western medicine instead prevailed. That condition continued until the Revolution of 1949. At that time, the overwhelming problems of the country were such that there were insufficient medical practitioners to supply the health needs. In order to compensate, Mao Zedong, who was leading the revolution, decided that traditional Chinese medicine should be revived. It should be applied widely and therefore take care of the health needs of the nation. In fact, this proved to be fairly successful, and when Westerners were allowed into China, especially after President Nixon's visit in 1972, they discovered the overwhelming use of acupuncture for the treatment of many conditions which were difficult to treat in the West. As a result of this finding, Westerners began experimenting with acupuncture. And again, beginning in 1972, the study of acupuncture was started up in the West and evolved considerably till today, when there are 30 states in which acupuncture is licensed as a primary method of health care. Herbal medicine, which was also very important in China, did not come to the West until a little bit later, and the reason for this is that the materials, the Chinese herbs, were generally restricted for import, and so people did not have access to them. Around 1976, however, the U.S. government and some other Western governments relaxed the regulations on import of Chinese herbs, and from that time on, the use of Chinese herbs in the West has become rather important. The Institute for Traditional Medicine and Preventive Health Care was founded just a few years later in 1979 and was one of the first organizations to promote the idea of widely using Chinese herbal medicine. In our program of education and research, we propose that both Oriental medicine as practiced in the ancient days and modern medicine as practiced in the West as well as in China be fully integrated to produce a healthcare system that would be accessible to all people. In order to integrate those two healthcare systems, we needed to have a large number of practitioners study and understand the use of traditional Chinese medicine, since Western medicine was already reasonably well understood in the West. To accomplish this goal, we set up training programs in which practitioners learned how to use Chinese herbs. In one of those training programs, one of the students, named Reese Smith of Berkeley, California, was given a thesis project to undertake, and he selected the subject of treating AIDS with Chinese herbs. His research project was interesting because we had already begun some investigation of the treatment of immune disorders with Chinese herbs. Back in 1976, when herbal medicine was first opened up to the West, there was formed in China a group which is called the Fuzhong Therapy Coordinating Group. This is a group of Chinese doctors who were given the task of counteracting the severe side effects of cancer therapies. Cancer is a disease which is often fatal and which is treated with chemicals, radiation, or surgery that often has damaging effects. Fuzhong therapy is an ancient Chinese idea of supporting the strength of the body to resist stress that is applied from external sources. It seemed appropriate, using traditional Chinese concepts, to support the strength of the body to resist the adverse effects of the cancer therapies. Thus, there would be an integration of traditional Chinese medicine and Western medicine. The Fuzhong Therapy Group involved about 60 practitioners from around China, and they researched a variety of herbs that were used for strengthening the body. Their results were impressive. They were able to reduce the side effects of cancer therapies and increase the longevity of people who had suffered from cancer. However, the information from that experimental work was not available to the West due to translational problems. In 1981, I was fortunate enough to be able to travel to northeast China, where there was an international meeting at Harbin, the provincial capital of the northernmost province in China. At that meeting, several doctors presented information about Fuzhong therapy. I listened to a paper delivered by Dr. Shengmai Ling, in which she had extracted polysaccharides from astragalus, given them to laboratory animals, and demonstrated a remarkable improvement in the immune system functions. What had puzzled me was the relationship between the orally consumed decoctions of astragalus and the injected isolated polysaccharides. From what I had learned from my training, polysaccharides ingested orally would be broken down in the digestive tract and absorbed as simple sugars. If they could not be broken down, they would pass through the intestines and not be absorbed. Therefore, they'd have no pharmacologic activity. Although it's very interesting to then get activity by injecting the materials, that would not show a relationship between the traditional use and the modern research. However, since then, we've found that large molecules, such as polysaccharides, are indeed absorbed into the bloodstream and do then exert their pharmacologic action. So aside from other problems, it was becoming clear that our original ideas about how herbal materials might work were being adjusted by what the Chinese were doing. In Japan, around the same time as this work was being done in China, scientists were isolating from mushrooms polysaccharides that were being given to laboratory animals and similarly showing tremendous impact on the immune system. One of the most remarkable tests was done in which animals had received transplanted tumor cells. The tumor cells would normally grow and eventually cause a fatal condition for the animal within about 2 months. With the polysaccharides given orally, the animal's immune system became so strong that the tumor cells were attacked, the tumors regressed, and eventually were eliminated over a period of about 4 to 5 weeks. So although we didn't realize it at the time, at that 1981 meeting, it was clearly revealed that polysaccharides, whether taken orally or given by injection, could bolster the immune system, helping it to either attack cancer cells or to restore immunity that had been depleted by cancer therapies. A couple of years later, the news about this kind of therapy became more widely known. In 1983, there was an international meeting in Beijing. It was co-sponsored by the Academy of Traditional Chinese Medicine in China and the University of Texas Health Sciences Center in Houston, Texas. These organizations met in Beijing to discuss the role of Chinese herbs in the treatment of immune disorders, and specifically in the treatment of cancer. The results of this meeting were dispersed widely, and the information eventually stimulated the Institute for Traditional Medicine to pursue a more active course in the investigation of immune disorders and antiviral compounds from Chinese herbs. In 1983, not much was known about AIDS. We knew some of the symptoms in the early phase of the disease, we knew some of the risk factors, and we had just learned that there was a virus isolated associated with the disease. In Reese's paper, he showed that the traditional indications for certain herb formulas matched reasonably well with the symptom pattern that was seen with AIDS. I thought that the results of his investigations were so significant that they ought to be published and read more widely. And so we worked together to publish a paper which eventually appeared in the Journal of the American College of Traditional Chinese Medicine, published in San Francisco. Although the paper was not widely read, the work that we did at that point led eventually to more detailed work and other publications which were more widely read. Perhaps the most influential was an article that I produced on the treatment of immune disorders using a new combination of herbs, basing that information on both traditional and modern approaches. In that paper, I presented a combination of 8 ingredients which had been used traditionally to promote the health of the individual and increase resistance to disease and to stress, and had also been researched recently and found to have remarkable effects in laboratory and clinical experiments. Interestingly, another doctor, Bruce Halstead, working independently, had reviewed the Chinese literature and come to a very similar conclusion, listing as the best immune-enhancing herbs from China 7 ingredients that were in correlation with the 8 ingredients I had listed. We should take a look at the 8-herb formula that I proposed in order to get a better understanding of how these herbs will be used in the treatment of AIDS. The astragalus 8-herb formula was eventually manufactured in an easy-to-consume form in tablets by a company called Health Concerns, and he labeled it Astra 8. This formula became well known in the United States as a therapy for immune weakness. Unfortunately, because I had mentioned in an article about the astragalus 8-herb formula various examples of immune deficiency syndromes, such as AIDS, Epstein-Barr virus disorder, herpes infections, influenza, and so on, some individuals interpreted that to mean that this was intended as a treatment for those diseases. In fact, the astragalus 8-herb formula, or the commercial product Astra 8, was intended basically as a health food. Thus, if one were suffering from cancer, from the side effects of cancer therapies, from a viral infection of various types, or some other cause of immune disorder, each individual patient might need to have their therapy adjusted somewhat for that particular condition. Susan Black and Jay Sordian went ahead and formed a project called the Immune Enhancement Project for the purpose of monitoring individuals using Chinese herbs for the treatment of HIV. In their proposal, they went ahead and gave a specific treatment for those individuals. The treatment that they had proposed, which was unbeknownst to me at the time, was that individuals would take the Astra 8 herb formula, and that they would also take a second formula, which was called reishi gun. Reishi gun is made from 2 of the medicinal mushrooms that was researched in Japan and shown valuable in the treatment of immune disorders. Now, this combination of Astra 8 and reishi gun was not a specific therapy for HIV, but was instead a combination of herbal ingredients that had been shown through research to bolster the immune system. I personally had some question as to the potential efficacy of this treatment plan. First of all, the fact that the herbs were not specifically designed for treating HIV had me somewhat concerned, since the symptoms of HIV might call for other kinds of therapy to be included. Secondly, the dosage being administered seemed to me to be rather low. In the Chinese experiments, decoctions of large amounts of herbs were being used. Sometimes 90 to 150 grams of raw materials boiled down into a couple of cups of water and then drunk as a bitter tea was often the therapy used. In this case, the use of tableted herb powders and bulk powder of the mushrooms provided the individual with approximately 10 to 15 grams of herb material per day, about 1/10 the dosage that was used in China. I had contacted the Chinese researchers who were at the meeting in Harbin that I had attended in 1981 and asked them about the difference between using decoctions and powders. This issue had arisen before because, for example, in the use of one of the herbs, Eleuthero ginseng, the Soviets had proposed using only 2 to 4 grams per day of powdered material as a treatment for immune deficiency and for bolstering resistance to influenza and other viral diseases, whereas the Chinese had proposed using 15 to 30 grams per day of the raw material in making decoction. Again, there was quite a large difference in the amount of material to be used. The researchers responded that there would be a difference in requirement for dosage in making decoctions versus using powders, and they had offered the figure of 10-to-1 ratio between the two, and that was precisely the ratio that we ended up using. The Immune Enhancement Project monitored HIV-positive individuals, those with the symptoms in the category of ARC, over a period of 8 months. At the end of 3 months, the results were known to many people in the San Francisco area, and a number of inquiries poured in, so that eventually we recruited more people into the study program. The results were fairly remarkable. What we had done was monitored the symptoms of the patients at the beginning of the study, and then on the monthly basis, we followed the presence or absence of those particular symptoms, or at least their degree of severity. Within 2 to 3 months, almost all of the participants showed a remarkable improvement. We had received information from practitioners that the patients seemed to suffer from a syndrome which in Chinese medicine is called blood deficiency. They therefore requested that we alter the basic astragalus 8-herb formula in a way that they could use for the treatment of blood deficiency. In accomplishing that, we first modified it by adding 2 ingredients and then added 2 more, producing a formula which was eventually called the astragalus 10+ formula. That prescription incorporated herbs which also bolstered the immune system but were known to benefit the blood. By doing so, we satisfied some of the practitioners' requests at the time. Let's take a look at the herbs that were added to the astragalus 8-herb formula to make the astragalus 10+ formula. In addition to making a formula change, the practitioners had requested other alterations. First, they wanted a formula that was easy to take. The decoctions, which were more traditional, required long boiling of the materials and drinking a foul-tasting tea, which many of the patients didn't like to do. The tableted products had the disadvantage of being more expensive. In response to this, we produced the astragalus 10+ formula in the form of a bulk powder. Now, this is one of the traditional ways of using Chinese herbs. The bulk powder could either be cooked for a short period of time to make a tea, or simply swallowed down. For example, a tablespoon at a time, swallowed down with a glass of water. This provided a cost-effective and reasonably convenient method for using the formula. For those who still wish to consume tablets instead of the bulk powder, we also produced the Astragalus 10 Plus formula in the tablet form, recommending 5 tablets 3 times per day to get a reasonable dosage. The use of Astragalus 10 Plus was followed up at the Kuan Yin Clinic with HIV patients during a 3-month treatment period. The results obtained with the Astragalus 8 herb formula seemed to be confirmed with Astragalus 10 Plus, and generally speaking, people were happier with the results using this modified formula. Shortly afterwards, we were able to help arrange for a funded study at the Kuan Yin Clinic. The funding was provided by the SHU Group, which was a combination of the Oriental Healing Arts Institute, the Brion Research Institute of Taiwan, the Sun10 Pharmaceutical Factory, and the Brion Herb Company of Hawaiian Gardens, California. These are headed by Hongyan Shu, and it was called the Hongyan Project, or HY Project for short. During this project, individuals received the herbs free of charge. The herb materials were produced by the Sun10 Pharmaceutical Factory, which made decoctions of the herbs, dried them, and then provided them in a convenient-to-use form, something like the powder of Astragalus 10 Plus. The herbs were administered to the patients by Dr. Zhang Qingcai, a Chinese doctor who is residing in Long Beach, California, and who has flown with these funds up to San Francisco twice per week to see the patients. After seeing the patients, he would then prescribe the appropriate formulas, and any necessary follow-up would be conducted by Misha Cohen and her colleagues at the Kuan Yin Clinic. After 6 months of treatment, results were analyzed and eventually published by the Oriental Healing Arts Institute. The HY formulas used in that study are still available today and are being used in Southern California and by many practitioners around the country. However, at the end of the 6-month period, the ability to fund a study and provide free product was no longer available, and so we then had to find another method of providing convenient to use and low-cost herb materials for the patients. The Institute for Traditional Medicine then embarked on a program of providing tableted herb powders for these projects at a specially reduced price. The extra cost involved in making them was taken up by other funds obtained by ITM. During the time when the Hongyan Project was underway, the Institute for Traditional Medicine was also doing research on developing formulas that were more specific for treating HIV. The herbs that have been used to date, the Astra 8 formula or the Astragalus 10 Plus formula, were tonic therapies that were used to bolster immunity, but they were not formulas that were typical of those used in treating viral infections. By this time, it was fairly clear that HIV was associated with an infection of a virus, and that the viral activity was causing many of the symptoms, including the immune depression. In addition, more and more patients seeking treatment had opportunistic infections, which required treatment by different types of herbs. We proposed a new therapy for HIV that included the herbs in a formula called Isatis 6. Isatis is an herb that is used extensively in modern China for the treatment of epidemic diseases. It's been used with success in the treatment of hepatitis, meningitis, influenza, and other viral conditions. The Isatis 6 herb formula is made up of herbs which are classified as being cold and bitter. In Chinese medical theory, cold and bitter herbs are not supposed to be taken for a prolonged period because they weaken the digestion and ultimately have a deleterious effect to the body. Because of this theory, we proposed that the Isatis 6 formula would be used only for a short period of time, perhaps a month, and then a break would be taken until the herbs could be taken again for about a month. Now, as we began using the Isatis 6 formula, one of the first things we found is that adverse effects from the use of this bitter and cold type of herb combination did not arise. It is possible that this didn't arise because the theory was not quite accurate, But more likely, it was because, in view of the traditional medical theory, we specifically avoided using certain Chinese herbs which might have been useful, but were more likely to cause problems with long-term use. The remaining herbs that we were able to select in the ISATA 6 formula proved to be useful on a continuous basis. The use of ISATA 6 made our treatment more specific for HIV and also for the opportunistic infections that arose with later stages of HIV as it approached the full-blown condition of AIDS. However, practitioners were still concerned about the treatment of anemia. It appeared that this condition worsened with regular use of AZT or prolonged exposure to HIV. Both of these seem to have a severe impact on the bone marrow, which is the source of blood production. In Chinese medicine, deer antler is one of the substances used to nourish the bone marrow and thereby produce more blood cells. Dr. Zhang, during his work, had proposed using deer antler, and the clinical results of using deer antler for a period of about 3 months seem to suggest that we ought to continue making use of this substance. The Institute for Traditional Medicine developed a formula called Antler 8 in order to provide deer antler in a convenient-to-use form. Traditionally, deer antler is considered to be quite warming. Because HIV often produces symptoms which are feverish and therefore in the warm category, the use of deer antler in such a condition is contraindicated. However, it can be made useful by combining it with other herbs that counter its warming qualities. These herbs have a cooling nature and resist the tendency of antler to cause a warming effect. The Antler 8 formula was then given to many of the patients who were experiencing anemia. Because these patients reported remarkable improvements in energy as well as in their anemic condition, it was decided to try Antler 8 with all of the patients. In general, everyone in the program liked using Antler 8. The few exceptions were individuals who seemed to experience intestinal cramping as a result of consuming this. We believe that this is a result of the gelatins in the deer antler and a second ingredient in the formula, tortoiseshell, which are not fully digested and which are then broken down by an opportunistic bacterial infection causing gas and contraction of the intestines. At this point in the development of treatment for HIV, we were using quite a large number of preparations. We had a basic immune-enhancing formula that provided astragalus, ganoderma, and other herbs that were beneficial for the immune system. Secondly, we were using isatis and other herbs that inhibited HIV and other infections. Third, we were using the deer antler and its adjunctive herbs in order to nourish the blood and also to benefit the bone marrow. In order to make this treatment more convenient, we decided to combine the 3 treatments together into a single formula, eliminating those herbs which we felt would not be effective in low dosage and enhancing the amounts of other herbs in the formula. The resulting prescriptions are called Composition and Composition A. Composition A is the same as Composition except that it includes the deer antler and tortoiseshell. The Composition A formula, based on its method of development, is a rather large formula. That is to say, it contains a large number of individual herb ingredients. Now, this fact has bothered some practitioners, believing that we should actually use only a small number of herbs in the formulation. However, the traditional practice of Chinese medicine includes the use of large herb formulas for treating a number of different disorders. For example, for very severe diseases, one often uses a preparation which is called Zaijiao Wan. This is a patent medicine that's manufactured by many different factories in China. The Zaijiao Wan prescription contains herbs that have a nature similar to that of composition A. It includes tonics, herbs that inhibit inflammation and infection, herbs that promote circulation, and herbs that generate blood. The Zaijiao Wan formulas will list on the ingredient panel anywhere from 25 to 35 ingredients. Scientists in China, however, have investigated the formula. They have ground up the pills into powder, looked at it under a microscope, and revealed that there are more than 50 ingredients in some of the Zaijiao formulas. In the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis, which is also an immune disorder involving autoimmunity, many of the prescriptions contain large numbers of herbs. Standard formulas may contain 15 to 30 different ingredients. Also, formulas that are used for the treatment of aging and impotence will often have more than 30 ingredients. So it is not uncommon in the practice of Chinese medicine to have large prescriptions. We will attempt to reduce the number of different ingredients in the formula as research confirms the value of doing so. Otherwise, we will continue to use the large prescription, composition A. There is one other aspect, however, of traditional Chinese medical practice that we felt important to incorporate into the treatment program, and that is the use of an adjunct formula that would address the specific symptoms or constitution of the individual. This correlates with what was proposed in the Shanghan Lun, that a basic formula could be modified for the individual needs and thereby used widely. ITM has produced more than 60 different prescriptions that can be used as adjunct formulas to the basic therapy. About 12 of these formulas are commonly used, of which 3 formulas receive the greatest use. One of the formulas is called Salvia Xiaowu. The primary ingredients are salvia, an herb that's used to promote blood circulation, and He Xiaowu, an herb that's used to nourish the blood. The herb salvia is used in Chinese medicine to treat damaged tissues. Whether the damage is caused by an inflammatory process, a virus, an injury, or some other process, salvia has been found to be extremely useful. The herb formulas are administered in a relatively easy-to-follow protocol. Composition A is taken 3 times per day, and each time the same amount of 7 tablets is taken. We arrived at the figure of 7 tablets because this number contains approximately 5 grams of raw herb material. We know that 5 grams of herb material contains approximately 25 milligrams of active ingredients, and this amount of active ingredient is about the minimum amount that would be pharmacologically active based on studies done with drug plants. The reason that the herb formulas are given 4 times a day and not fewer times is that we have found from research with flavonoids, which are a type of antiviral compound, that if the herbs are not present in adequate dosage during most of the day, there's a good opportunity for the virus to escape their influence. Flavonoids and other antiviral compounds seem to be of greatest influence if they're present when the virus is attempting to enter a new cell. Work that's been done, for example, in vitro at the University of California at Davis or in Hong Kong, which showed that 26 Chinese herbs inhibit HIV, were shown to be effective when the virus tries to enter the cell. Herbal ingredients enter the bloodstream within about half hour after tablets are ingested. They reach a peak dosage at about 1 to 1.5 hours after ingestion, and after about 4 to 5 hours, the amount of material left in the bloodstream is relatively small. Therefore, including a dosage every 4 hours is prudent in making sure that there's a sufficient amount of the herbal ingredients in the bloodstream throughout the day. This treatment program is administered by practitioners across the country. Monitoring programs have been developed in San Francisco, Los Angeles, New Mexico, New York, Florida, and Illinois. In these monitoring programs, the patients all take either composition A, or a small number will take composition instead, plus an adjunct formula, and the effects of this treatment are monitored in 3-month periods. The 3-month period, as it ends, then gives the individual an option to either continue this type of therapy or to pursue some other kind of therapy. Approximately 50% of all the patients are satisfied with the therapy as is and decide to continue. Therefore, we have obtained, over the period of 2 years in which we've monitored patients on a regular basis, data from a number of individuals that have remained in the programs for 6 months, 9 months, a year, or even longer. The practitioners that monitor these patients report to me that the longer the patient stays in the program, the better are the results of the herbal therapy. At this point, it would be a good idea to take a look at the results we've obtained from these different monitoring programs. Since early 1987, when a prepared Chinese herb formula for treating immune weakness first appeared in the U.S., the number of participants being monitored for their responses has increased dramatically. The program has grown to include 7 clinics and 400 patients. More than half of these participants are also receiving acupuncture treatments. ITM receives raw data and summaries from each clinic. Here is a typical summary of information from a project headed by Tom Eyring in Los Angeles, involving 31 patients during 3 months of treatment. One of the early symptoms of HIV infection is a profound fatigue and lethargy. Nearly 3 out of every 4 participants reported a notable reversal of this symptom. However, this was not always interpreted as an improvement in overall health. Slightly less than half of the participants felt that their health had noticeably improved during the treatment period, while only 8% felt a decline of health. In the absence of treatment, the trend is towards progressive deterioration of health. T-cell counts were only monitored in a few participants due to the high cost of the tests. The trend was towards higher T-cell counts, with 60% of the participants showing an increase after the use of herbs. The degree of change was dramatic in some individuals, but the statistical average change for all participants was a meager increase of 80. This contrasts to a reported decrease of 40 T-cells in a 6-month period for individuals not under treatment. Many of the symptoms classified as belonging to the AIDS-related complex are relieved by the use of Chinese herbs. Thus far, Kaposi sarcoma does not respond to treatment of up to 6 months duration. Detailed information about the theory of treatment is presented in the book, Chinese Herbal Therapies for Immune Disorders. The development of the herb treatment for HIV and the results from several projects are found in the book, Kong Wen. The ingredients and indications for the formulas used as adjunct therapies are presented in A Bag of Pearls. We have a long way to go, but we've come a long way since we developed the astragalus 8-herb formula at the beginning of the research. It is hoped that in the near future, by adjusting the dosage, formulation, and adjunct therapies, we can obtain much better results. Certainly, the proposal that traditional practitioners be consulted for finding antiviral compounds and other useful therapies is a correct one. The traditional Chinese practitioners have found many herbs which prove helpful in the treatment of immune disorders such as HIV. By exploring further what they can contribute, we may be able to make greater progress in treatment of this disease. I hope you will keep in contact with us in regard to the results of such treatment programs. By contacting ITM with your suggestions, ideas, commentaries, and results, we can help provide a better treatment in the future. For now, this is Subhuti Dharmananda wishing you the best of health.